Vin Diesel, one of Hollywood's most renowned actors, made an unusual decision to enter his own restaurant anonymously and observe firsthand how everything operated when he wasn't around. However, he never imagined that night he would witness something that would deeply move him. What he did next surprised everyone. Los Angeles, California. 10:45 p.m. The city glowed under the night lights, and the prestigious Diesel's Garage restaurant, owned by the star Vin Diesel, was full of customers enjoying the sophisticated atmosphere and exclusive dishes prepared by renowned chefs. Waiters moved quickly between tables, serving expensive wines and exquisite meals, ensuring every detail of the experience was flawless. However, that night, a special customer had entered without being recognized. Wearing a hoodie and a discreet cap, Vin Diesel went unnoticed among the patrons and staff. This was exactly how he wanted it. Over the past few months, he had received many compliments about his restaurant, but he had also heard disturbing rumors. It was said that some employees were dissatisfied and that the managers weren't treating the staff with the respect they deserved. Something seemed wrong, and he decided to check it out personally. As he walked through the dining area, carefully observing the flow of service, Vin Diesel decided to head to the back of the kitchen. He wanted to see firsthand how the employees were truly working. However, as he passed by the door of the staff locker room, a muffled sound caught his attention. He stopped immediately and leaned against the wall, listening more intently. It was a female voice. One of the waitresses was quietly crying, trying to hold back her tears. The actor's heart raced as he heard her words between sobs. "I can't take it anymore. This isn't fair." Vin Diesel furrowed his brow, feeling a tightness in his chest. The waitress kept talking to herself, unaware that someone was listening. "I work so hard, but they keep treating me like I'm worth nothing. I just wanted a fair chance." Her voice trembled with emotion, and then came the sentence that made Vin Diesel feel a lump in his throat. "If I lose this job, I don't know how I'll pay for my mom's treatment." The actor closed his eyes for a moment. Those words hit him hard. He knew what it was like to fight for family, carry a huge burden on his shoulders, and do everything possible to help loved ones. Now, right under his own roof, there was a young woman going through the same struggle. He couldn't simply ignore it. But before taking any action, he needed to find out the whole truth. With a plan in mind, Vin Diesel made an unexpected decision. He would disguise himself as a restaurant employee. Taking advantage of a moment of distraction in the kitchen, he grabbed an extra apron, tied it around his waist, and held a notepad. Now, he was just another one of the staff, and no one suspected anything. Observing the work environment carefully, he blended in with the waiters and cooks, analyzing every detail. It was then that he spotted the waitress who had been crying moments earlier. Her name was Emily Carter, a young woman no older than 22. Her face was still marked by her recent tears, but she was trying to smile as she balanced heavy trays and served tables with dedication. Vin Diesel felt a tightness in his chest upon seeing her. But within seconds his expression changed. He ended up witnessing something that filled him with indignation. Emily was serving a table with agility, balancing a tray full of hot dishes, when Todd, the restaurant manager, approached her. He was a tall man, with harsh features and an air of arrogance that seemed to weigh down the atmosphere. With an impatient expression, he stared at her coldly. "What are you doing? Stop stalling and hurry up with those orders." His voice was harsh, cutting, filled with impatience and contempt. Emily lowered her head immediately, avoiding any confrontation. "Yes, sir," she murmured, quickening her pace to avoid further retaliation. But Vin Diesel, who was watching everything closely, noticed something strange. Todd didn't speak to the other waiters like that. His authoritative and harsh tone seemed reserved only for Emily. Seconds later, one of the waiters, a young man in a dark apron, approached Emily and whispered with a worried look. "Is he harassing you again?" Emily let out a long sigh and nodded, speaking softly. "Yes, but I can't lose this job. My mom still needs medical appointments." Vin Diesel felt a wave of indignation rise in his chest. His muscles tensed and his fists clenched involuntarily. Now he had no doubts. He knew exactly what he needed to do. What happened next shocked the entire restaurant. Vin Diesel slowly took off the apron as if preparing to step into the most important role of his life. His posture straightened, his shoulders lifted, and he walked confidently to the center of the dining area. When he took off his cap and raised his face, the revelation was instant. A woman at the neighboring table widened her eyes and let out a surprised scream. "Oh my God, it's Vin Diesel." The impact was immediate. The entire restaurant froze. Silverware was left on the plates, glasses hovered in the air. Customers turned toward him, stunned. The waiters stopped serving. Todd, the manager, was completely paralyzed, his face losing color in a matter of seconds. But no one was more shocked than Emily. She widened her eyes, feeling her heart race. Vin Diesel? She whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. It was then that he looked directly at her and, with a firm voice, said, "Emily, come here." Fear flashed in her eyes. Had she done something wrong? Did this mean the end of her job? With a lump in her throat, she hesitated. Did I do something wrong? But Vin Diesel just smiled, a gentle smile but filled with determination. No, Emily. You did everything right. But someone here didn't. Slowly he turned his head toward Todd. The manager, now sweating cold, swallowed hard. "And I want some answers." The restaurant fell into an absolute silence. The air felt dense, as if everyone were waiting for the climax of a dramatic film. What happened next was simply unbelievable. Todd tried to open his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He never imagined he'd be confronted by the restaurant's owner himself, let alone have it happen in front of customers and employees. Vin Diesel crossed his arms, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Tell me, Todd, why do you treat Emily differently from the other employees?" The manager blinked rapidly, trying to regain his composure. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Diesel." But Vin Diesel wasn't interested in excuses. He had seen and heard enough. "You know very well what I'm talking about. You yell at her. You humiliate her. You harass her. And now I want to know." What? Todd was speechless. The silence that enveloped the restaurant was deafening. Vin Diesel took a step forward, his presence dominating the room. "I built this restaurant to be a place of excellence but also of respect. If an employee is being mistreated here, then this restaurant is not up to what I believe in." He looked around, staring at every customer, every waiter, everyone present. Then he turned back to Todd. "Do you have anything to say, Todd?" The manager, cornered and out of options, opened and closed his mouth several times, but no excuse seemed good enough. The weight of Vin Diesel's words fell upon him like a hammer. What happened next was something no one would ever forget. Emily stood motionless, unable to process everything that was happening. Just minutes ago, Vin Diesel was only a mysterious customer, dressed in a hoodie and cap, someone no one paid much attention to. Now there, before everyone, he revealed himself as the true owner of the restaurant, and he was furious. The silence in the dining room was so intense that you could hear the rapid breathing of some employees. Vin Diesel crossed his arms and directed a sharp gaze toward Todd. "You're the manager here, right?" Todd, clearly uncomfortable, tried to mask the tension with a forced smile. "Why, yes, Mr. Diesel. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." But Vin Diesel didn't even flinch. His stare, fixed on Todd, was like a predator studying its prey. "No need for flattery," he said, his voice firm and impatient. "I just want to know one simple thing." He raised his arm and pointed directly at Emily. Why was this girl crying in the locker room instead of working peacefully? The question made Todd's face pale before flushing violently. He opened and closed his mouth, searching for an excuse. I don't know what she's talking about," he said, his voice trembling. Vin Diesel looked at Emily, his expression softening slightly. "Emily, can you tell me what's going on?" The young waitress looked around, feeling the weight of the gazes on her. Her hands trembled slightly, but then, with a deep sigh, she gathered her courage. Her eyes quickly glanced at Todd before returning to Vin Diesel. Her throat was dry, but she finally spoke. "He humiliates me every day. He gives me the worst tasks, yells at me for no reason, and threatens to fire me if I complain." The dining room seemed to hold its breath. The other waiters exchanged looks, visibly tense. Until one of them, gathering courage, decided to speak up. "She's telling the truth," he declared, his voice firm. "He does this to her all the time." Another waiter soon joined in the accusation. "And it's not just that. He takes her tips and gives them to other employees." The shock spread throughout the restaurant like wildfire. Customers began to murmur, some outraged, others bewildered. It was a scandal unfolding right before their eyes. And Todd? He was pale. Sweat streamed down the side of his face as his mind raced for an escape. Vin Diesel turned to him slowly, his gaze capable of piercing steel. Todd tried to swallow, but his mouth felt as dry as a desert. "Mr. Diesel, I can explain. This is all a big misunderstanding." But Vin Diesel didn't blink. His voice came out deep, low, filled with crushing weight. "Do you know who I am, Todd?" The manager nodded repeatedly, nearly desperate. "See, course, the owner of this restaurant." Vin Diesel took a step forward, his presence becoming even more menacing. "And do you know what I do to people who abuse my team?" Todd didn't answer. You didn't need to. His face already said it all. Todd began to tremble. Sweat poured down his forehead as he desperately tried to regain control of the situation. Mr. Diesel, please listen to me. I can explain. But Vin Diesel wasn't interested in excuses. He leaned slightly forward, his voice low, firm, and filled with authority. You're fired. No. Time seemed to stop. Todd's eyes widened in disbelief. What? The silence lasted only a second before it was broken by a wave of applause. First, the customers, who erupted in claps and murmurs of approval. Then, the waiters exchanged surprised looks before joining in the celebration. The corrupt manager turned pale. Mr. Diesel, please. I've worked here for years. Vin Diesel kept his gaze fixed on him, unmoving. And you've abused your power all this time. Grab your things and leave. Todd opened his mouth to protest but didn't get the chance. 2 restaurant security guards had already approached and positioned themselves by his side. One of them placed a firm hand on his shoulder and spoke in a decisive tone. Let's go, man. It's over for you. The manager clenched his fists, furious. His face was red with shame and anger. He ripped off his apron and threw it forcefully to the ground. His gaze turned to Emily, full of resentment. This is your fault. But before he could say anything else, Vin Diesel moved quickly, placing himself between the two. His stare was cold as steel, his presence overwhelming. If I hear you tried to harm this girl again? His voice was low but carried a silent, undeniable threat. We'll have another kind of conversation. Todd swallowed hard. He knew there was no way out anymore. With no other option, he turned and hurriedly exited through the door, disappearing into the night. Forever. And then the restaurant erupted in celebration. The staff laughed and hugged each other, relieved. The customers raised their glasses and chatted excitedly about what they had just witnessed. It felt like a historic moment. But Emily, she stood still, holding her apron against her chest, her eyes wide, trying to process everything that had just happened. It was then that Vin Diesel took another step forward. He grabbed the restaurant's microphone, tapped it lightly to get everyone's attention, and with a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, he said, I think tonight turned out a little different than what you expected, huh? The customers laughed and applauded once again. But what Vin Diesel did next left Emily completely speechless. Looking directly at Emily, the star made an announcement that made her legs go weak. He took a deep breath and said in a firm, clear voice, From this moment on, Emily Carter is no longer a waitress at this restaurant. The dining room fell silent. The staff exchanged confused looks. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Her heart stopped for a moment. Am I being fired? Her voice came out weak, almost a whisper. Vin Diesel smiled slightly and shook his head. Quite the opposite. He took a step forward, looking directly into her eyes. Emily Carter, from today, you are the new manager of this restaurant. The restaurant exploded in applause. The sound of clapping and cheering filled the room, but Emily stood completely still. She looked at Vin Diesel as if he were joking. What? But how? I don't know anything about managing a restaurant. Vin Diesel crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. You know much more than you think. Emily let out a nervous laugh. Vin, all I know how to do is take orders and clean tables. He shook his head. No, Emily. You know much more than that. You work hard, treat people with respect, and you know exactly what it's like to be on the other side. You understand what it is to be exploited, and you also know how people should be treated. Emily's eyes began to fill with tears. But I'm not qualified for this. Vin Diesel smiled confidently. That we can fix. He made a gesture, and one of his assistants entered the restaurant carrying a black folder. Vin Diesel took the folder and opened it, revealing an official training contract. The paper contained a clear proposal, a restaurant management training course and a salary much higher than she'd ever imagined. He placed the contract in front of her and said, If you accept, I'll pay for your full training. You'll learn everything you need to become a great leader. But the main thing, you already have. Emily looked at him, her voice trembling. And what's that? Vin Diesel smiled warmly. The right heart for the job. The entire restaurant held its breath. All eyes were on Emily. She looked at the contract, then at Vin Diesel, then at her co-workers. Then, her mind was flooded with memories. The nights of crying from exhaustion, the constant fear of being fired, the daily struggle to take care of her mother. And for the first time she felt like her life was finally changing. With a smile through her tears, Emily took the pen and signed. The restaurant exploded in celebration. The staff rushed to hug her, cheering for her. The customers clapped and smiled. And Vin Diesel. He just smiled, winked at Emily and said, Welcome to the team, Chief Emily. Still crying, Emily mumbled between sobs. Thank you, Vin, thank you for everything. But Vin Diesel wasn't finished. He still had one last surprise. After the celebration, he called Emily to a more private corner of the restaurant and handed her an envelope. She looked at him, confused. What is this, Vin? He smiled slightly. Open it and see. With trembling hands, Emily opened the envelope. When she saw what was inside, her jaw dropped. It was a check. And the amount? Exactly enough to cover all of her mother's medical treatment. Emily brought her hands to her mouth, tears falling uncontrollably. Vin? I can't accept this. Vin Diesel placed a firm yet gentle hand on her shoulder and said, You can. And you will accept it? Emily shook her head, still in shock. But why? Why are you doing all of this for me? Vin Diesel looked deeply into her eyes and replied with a voice full of sincerity. Because no one should cry alone in a locker room, wondering if their life will ever get better. Emily couldn't hold back her emotions. She collapsed into his arms, hugging him with all the gratitude she felt. The entire restaurant fell silent, watching that moment unfold. And in that instant, Emily knew her life would never be the same. 6 months passed, and Emily became an extraordinary manager. The restaurant thrived, attracted new customers, and the team had never been so happy. The atmosphere changed completely. Now, everyone worked with respect and motivation. Then, on a special day, Vin Diesel returned to the restaurant. He watched for a few minutes, seeing Emily coordinate everything with confidence, moving around with a radiant smile on her face. When he finally approached her, he asked, So, how's everything going? Emily smiled, with a sparkle in her eyes. Better than I ever could have imagined. Vin Diesel nodded, satisfied. I knew you had it in you. Emily took a deep breath and said, her voice full of emotion, You changed my life, Vin. He smiled and shook his head. No, Emily. You changed your own life. I just gave you a push. The two shared a firm handshake. And in that moment, Emily knew she would never again be just a waitress. Now she was an example of perseverance. And all of this happened because Vin Diesel decided to secretly enter his own restaurant. He could have ignored what he saw. He could have pretended it wasn't his problem. But instead, he changed one employee's life forever. What do you think of this story? Comment and share to spread this message of inspiration.